Arcane was art, and sick, and I think legendary. I think this whole experience, all of Arcane Season 1, is magic. Arcane takes place between two twin cities, Piltover and what is at first called the Undercity, which is later known as Zaun. Piltover is a city of luxury, technological progress, and supposed equality, while Zaun is a broken city, crawling with corruption, pollution, and injustice. However, the black and white gets stripped from these cities, and the characters that call them home with each episode. The story spirals around two sisters of Zaun, Vi and Jinx, or at the start of the show, Violet and Powder, and two men of Piltover, Jace and Victor. The first season is about their very separate but intertwined coming-of-age stories and how the state of the world changed them and how they will change the world, or at least the first steps of doing so. And the show's amazing animation is done by Fortiche. This is a European studio that's worked with Riot since the Get Jinxed music video in 2013, which tremendously blew up. They also did the Echo video and a few others, which included, the Arcane characters, and they started to flesh out this style, this world, this theme, this feel, this vibe, this emotion that really just kind of exploded here in Arcane. But they also worked on Riot's most popular video, which it sits at 400 million views right now, which is the Pop Stars KDA video, which basically created a K-pop group. So Fortiche is kind of good at what they do, but not just good, not just professional or flawless even, but they create this art, this something special that you've never really seen before. And I can reference that it kind of looks like Spider-Verse, or maybe some people say it kind of looks like Claws, or this or that, but really in the end, when you really watch just one full episode, if you watch this full season, you know that Arcane is art, and it really could have only have been done in this way thanks to Fortiche Productions. That also goes along with the characters and the overall world building and how this production was actually laid out before our eyes. Arcane's scenery, which has really had like a decade to really be mulled over and thought about, as this is from a video game that is very much based on city-states warring with each other and characters conflicting even between each other that are supposedly in the same faction. There's a lot of depth that really drips throughout this entire universe that comes through, I think, just through the scenery of Arcane. It is always silently screaming. The world of Runeterra is always loudly looming in the background. If it's the chem-tech pipes that are running everywhere, the neon lights of the Undercity, or you see all the technological advancements, sure, in Piltover, but there's this solar punk vibe all the way strewn throughout it, and you definitely see the privilege and privy in the society of Piltover versus the culture that has actually culminated because of the hardships inside of Zaun. And then when you actually later in the show see people from other city-states, you see that they act and behave totally different, and their builds, their physique, the way that they move and are animated are entirely different. So yes, the script, starting with just the bare bones foundations of the background, the wallpaper, every single scene is a painting. I have to say that I am in love with the sci-fi approach to the world building here, where it is basically let the world sort of speak for itself within particular scenes. From the literal like chemical punk aesthetic of one city versus the Euro/solar punk of another, to their wardrobes, to what the technology they're using in the background, what are they doing in the background, what foods are they eating. You can actually parse together all different entire lifestyles and literal cultures between these two very connected twin cities, which, yeah, first glance, one is doom and gloom, very Gotham, the other is very regal and Greek almost, with Magitech, but in the end there's actually a lot more nuance that isn't just like expositioned out to you, such as the chemical technology that is actually heavily involved with Zaun. So I really appreciate that, especially as a punk kid myself. And talking about the backgrounds and the overall scenery and the overall art of the show, it's actually funny to talk about how something that would normally be a con in other instances is actually a boon, as long as they continue with the trend of this throughout the different seasons. But as a whole season, if you binge it right now, you'll definitely notice there is a sort of inconsistency with the stylization or the pacing of certain scenes, and that's because they wanted to fit in basically a music video in every single episode. And this is a weird and wild take, possibly. Like, people are going to feel very polarized by it because it sort of takes you out of the show. But at the same time, in a sort of weird meta and arcadey sense, it can bring you in. It can give you a taste of these characters' inner monologue, which isn't spoken or exposed, except for these visuals and through this music, which is very modern and tied to our cultures and our real world. It is real world bands with real voices overlaying on the show. And yet, it actually helped me get a vibe and understand the concepts that these characters are really wrestling with. Their really harsh childhoods, their trauma, and their personalities, I think, are exuded because of this stylization, where basically they just throw together a music video. I think a lot of people's favorite scene comes with Echo versus Jinx. This scene said so much, despite the fact that it was so short. It did not do much, but wow, was it one, freaking cool, but two, also just had a lot of these little details and a history between these characters that you just kind of missed a little bit. Like Echo and Jinx, they used to be really great friends, and maybe you can kind of start to see how their innocence has been corrupted by this entire situation, and then that you can extrapolate to every character in the show, and then maybe even from there extrapolate to every person inside of this universe, as Runeterra itself is an entire world of wolves, and it is a very harsh place, despite the fact that Piltover looked the way it did. But then again, the moral and the story and the way the script has flown out here gave so much depth to the realities of war, of magic, of how these different city-states and their economies, how they might potentially work. But in the end, the ethos of Piltover versus, the hardcore, tooth and nail survival instincts of Zaun and maybe every other city, how that all comes into play. It really does unfold, I think, very poetically, but not all in your face. This is stuff that you really got to dig through, or maybe search in the background for in the scenery, or, understand maybe a deeper lore coming from League of Legends with that schema, potentially. But in the end, I think with a science fiction perspective, with that, wide-eyed wonder of going into this, of not knowing much and leaving not knowing much still, there's so many questions in the air, but you do know the distinct questions that are needed to be asked. And the cliffhangers of Season 1, I think, are actually very satisfying in the ways that they don't satisfy all of your answers. I think it's so fitting that Arcane is starting with the story of the emergence of Hex Tech, as well as the propagation of Chem Tech within Zaun and Piltover, two cities that really exist to try to get up and above beyond the arcane and magical warfare that is plaguing the other city-states inside of the world of Runeterra. But this is still about a very grounded and realistic telling of very human lives, despite the fact that this is a fantasy world with more than just humans and a very fantastical concept, literal magic, literal sci-fi, all thrown together. Somehow this show is more real than most things that I've seen, and that is because of basically the acting of this show. It's not just pretty wallpaper sceneries, it's not just a really fantastic setting, it is absolutely brought to life, thanks in part to the amazing voice acting cast, for Tisha's amazing attention to detail with the animation, and of course, the absolute depth, like the mild, deep depth of League of Legends lore that's been really chewed on and digested for about a decade now. Basically, every single character steals every single scene, and I'm talking even background characters. There is just a level of attention to detail that I have not seen in a very, very long time, if not just like in little bursts in movies. With Arcane, it's just all of the time. It doesn't stop. It's frankly amazing, but I do have to say, there is a particular voice actor, Jason Spizak, as the voice of Silco, that really, I think, above all, just kind of came out of there. This character arc was so interesting, unique, and frankly, like, just applause-worthy. And I think most people would probably agree with me that this villain of the show and how his story twisted and turned, and twisted in our guts, frankly, and turned our hearts, was fantastic. Great story, but the voice really brought it to life.
For that, I thank you. friend.
Silco debatably is like the main character of season 1, and he's absolutely the antagonist of the story, and yet I think in the end a protagonist in terms of the world concept of Runeterra, and we'll see actually his ideologies when it comes to season 2, hopefully with Zaun versus Piltover and those two cities versus, I don't know, everyone else. I can't wait to see Noxus. But I do want to talk about specifically my favorite animations that I've seen, which is just like, again, everyone's so freaking amazing, but it's specifically the fragile and vulnerable animations of the character of Victor. Definitely a fan favorite. This childlike wonder in this character that is literally broken, but you see sort of a staggering, stuttery sort of animations, always a shaking to him, and always looking up, always looking with a twisted posture, and just so much attention to detail with just specifically those kind of concepts of this is a crippled character with potentially a crippled heart, a crippled past, a very harsh upbringing, and that just really reminds and kind of interwebs with all of the themes with a lot of different characters. And so through Victor, we're seeing sort of what could be, how things could be so good, how things could be so bad, and that tug of war in the heart of, anything at any stake for progress for the future. And what does that even mean? What does that even look like? Is progress a straight line? And the cost that comes with that as well. Then of course we got to talk about the mixed media art that is just constantly exploding around our beloved Jinx. Jinx is probably the character that frankly started all of this, and Jinx is absolutely a pinpoint focus of a lot of the beat points of the show and basically the ending. But because of the way the show is animated or drawn or modeled, or see, that's the thing, it's all of it. It is drawn and 3D modeled, and at the same time, like, it just really interweaves stuff where it's like sometimes you can't tell if it's 2D or 3D. Sometimes you can clearly tell it's very stylistically, okay, this is comic book, okay, this is 2D, this is anime. And sometimes they just mix and match it. Sometimes they change art styles entirely, like I mentioned previously with the music videos. And it really with Jinx, the way they handled that character, and again with every character they actually do different things and kind of tweak the art style just a little bit differently. But with Jinx specifically, you just really feel that it's always a music video basically. This whole show, but especially the scenes with Jinx, are just so animated music video ripe. And according to the developer diaries of the show, that is exactly what they wanted to do. It was very much focused on like music, theme, vibe, just make everything a music video. Every scene should look like a wallpaper on your phone or on your desktop, and every single character steals their own scenes, basically live in their own universe, as they all have unique perspectives. And that with the slight switching and changing of how everything is directed and their art styles, and maybe the extra mixed media art that they overlay in these scenes, all of that, it just kind of goes to hammer on that point. But it all really is sort of gift wrapped all together with just this overall emotive energy. Arcane really focuses on delivering a very dark, brooding message, but gift-wrapped very colorfully. All these gray moralities are actually very colorful, I guess described, portrayed here in this show. And I want to say the show is fun, but it kind of is not. It kind of leaves you wanting and hungry and hurt, honestly. And at the same time, man, there really is just such an adventure. And it's scary, but it is definitely, absolutely an epic that's, I think, currently being told. And I think that basically everyone who is of appropriate age should watch this show. Do keep in mind, it is not for children, and frankly, a lot of stuff is incredibly dark and maybe not even safe for life sort of concepts, but I think that is the story that needs to be told here. This story, this world is very serious, and Fortiche and Riot Games are going about producing this show and exploring these stories sincerely. Everything builds to an emotional, bombing cliffhanger at the end of Season 1, and I cannot wait for more. I cannot wait for Season 2. And it leads me to reinstalling League of Legends and diving more into the world and playing maybe the card game. But I have to say, for those who haven't played the games or know nothing of League of Legends, that might actually be a better experience for you going into this. This show is really an absolute breath of fresh air, even for those who do know these characters, or maybe even grew up with them. No, this is something entirely different. This is a whole new beast, and it's kind of becoming a monster. I can see why everyone is clamoring about it. The reception on my channel has been great, talking about the reviews per episode, and I have to say that if I were to give it a rating, it's a perfect rating. This is probably the best show that I've seen in a very long time. You remember the start of great shows like The Expanse, Game of Thrones, all these different characters interweaving together? That is Arcane. You know, the amazing animation and fantastic world building and the deep mythology of Avatar and maybe some of your favorite animes? That is Arcane. Arcane is really the full package, and it also comes in a very strange and artistic package at that, which might not be for everybody all of the time, but in the end, I have to say, wow, for this kind of thing where they could have went so safe, they could have went so assuredly with a very straightforward approach, they decided to be experimental. They decided that the stories being told here really deserve so much more than that, because it is more than that. It is more than just a story. This is a culture, the culture of League of Legends, the culture of those who love sci-fi, hip-hop music, and the culture of us, gamers. It's kind of coming to life. Injustices that can be paralleled from real world here in a fantasy universe that are more safely digested and consumed, and yet not toned down. This is a very real story. And Arcane drips of, yeah, movie magic. Arcane is magic.